thing about Amazon Originals is I think they've only had like a couple of shows that I've actually liked, and a lot of shows that I really didn't like. I think that the two big shows that come to mind, maybe three, okay, are The Boys, which was the first show, Amazon Original show that I thought was actually really good. Then there's Invincible. There is a third one, and that's more of a recent development, and I don't know if, the thing is, do I give Amazon credit for it? I guess I do. I mean, Amazon is just as responsible for it as it is for the other two shows. That's Has Been Hotel. There were a bunch of shows I really didn't like, right? Rings of Power, for one. That's the Lord of the Rings show spinoff that really just kind of dropped the ball. Didn't really apply the proper amount of respect to the source material that it should have, and tried to just sort of push a bunch of prequel material together into this weird amorphous blob that just isn't really satisfying for fans, and for non-fans, I don't know, it's just kind of whatever, I guess. If you're not like a fan of the material and you wanted to see it adapted, you were just looking for a show that's like mildly interesting to watch. I don't think it's like that exciting to watch. I don't think it's really that well done. It definitely doesn't compare to the Peter Jackson movies, for sure. The other one I was really hopeful for was the Wheel of Time show. That show has also really let me down. That show is also a big disappointment. And now we have Fallout. But I needed to say all of that, okay? Because that's my impression of Amazon Originals, all right? It's like, oh, there's a couple that I like, but most of the Amazon Originals I've seen are kind of shit. And really, really disappointing, especially when they've been adaptations of a material that I like. Fallout is a game series that I'm really, well, I don't know if I'd say I'm really passionate about. I think I have the same level of passion about Fallout as most casual Fallout enjoyers. You played 3, you played New Vegas, you played 4, maybe you didn't like 4 as much, maybe you didn't finish 4, but you really liked 3, and you really liked New Vegas, right? And the reason for that, there's a lot of reasons. I mean, it's a big open world game, but I think the main appeal of Fallout is its world. Its world is really very complex, very alive, very unique. That's the main appeal of Fallout to me. And it has so much space for storytelling. There's so much weirdness with the world that you can have all sorts of strange circumstances show up. You can have a city where there's a ghoul guy who's like immortal, and he fuses with a tree, and there's a whole bunch of people that build a cult around this guy, but he's just miserable and he wants to die, right? That's an actual side quest in Fallout 3. It's fantastic. But did I have faith in the adaptation? Not really. Did I see the trailers and think, this is probably not going to be good? Yes, I did. But I sat down, I watched the show, and I actually ended up really liking it. I think it's one of the few shows that I have enjoyed in recent times. I've actually had a really good time watching. And there's a handful of reasons for that. I mean, I think one of the big ones is that obviously I think it adapts the world and the material really well. And I don't think it tries to specifically adapt any specific story from the Fallout games. It instead takes the world and creates a new story set in that world. And I think that is one of the best ways they could have done that. Like, for sure. I much prefer doing this because oftentimes adaptations of like the actual thing itself, I feel like often fall flat. Part of the problem is you have to it's hard not to compare it to the source material and be like, well, is it better? Is it worse? You know, you have the recent Last of Us adaptation, which basically is just almost shot for shot, in a lot of ways, just exactly what happens in the game. They only change a couple things, they remove a handful of things, and they add some small little details. But for the most part, it's almost like basically exactly what happens in the game. And so it's hard not to just compare it and be like, okay, which version do I like? And I would much prefer to play the game, Last of Us, than to watch the show, Last of Us. I think the game was much more endearing. I think it just works better as a game. There's small little details that you can't really appreciate in a show that you can't appreciate in the game. Like, for example, obviously the map design, the design of, the levels. I really enjoy in The Last of Us when you're, like, walking through, there's a part of the game where you're, like, walking through, like, a neighborhood. And, like, you go in through these abandoned houses, and you can go through the house and you can see, oh, this is a kid's room. Oh, this is the parents' room. Downstairs they have the kitchen, the living room. Maybe there's a basement. And every house looks distinctly different. And I'm like, that's something that you can really only appreciate in a game, is like that level of detail in the world. And in a show, you kind of take it for granted because you can't really explore any of the houses. It's just whatever the show decides to show you. Anyways, whatever. So what did I really like? I liked the acting. I liked the characters. I will say I really liked the characterization of the Vault Dweller in this. Usually in Fallout games, you play as the Vault Dweller, so the Vault Dweller's personality is often just what you make it out to be. So they did have a little bit of creative liberties in like creating a personality for a Vault Dweller that is going out into the wasteland. And I think her personality works really well. And I think it also works well within the quirky, like, brutal sort of sense of humor that the world has. She has this bright, optimistic naivety and this notion that most people will probably want to follow the rules, and it doesn't really make sense to stray too far from the rules because that's bad. That's a bad thing. And then the more she wanders around the wasteland, the more she realizes how much it sucks out there, and how much she just wants to like go back home to the safety of her vault. I quite like that character a lot. She's very funny and very endearing. You have the Brotherhood of Steel guy, Marcus, I believe. Oh, the Vault Dwellers, her name is Lucy. Lucy McLean, specifically. Marcus, I feel two ways about, okay? When me and my friends were discussing this, a little while back, because they were watching the show. I think I'd only watched, like, maybe the first episode, and they were talking about it. And they were talking about how they didn't like this guy's acting, right? And over the course of the show, I'm like, I kind of understood what they meant, at the beginning. And then over the course of the show, I started to think about it. I'm like, I don't know that I would say, like, I think the issue with this character is that he's mischaracterized really early on to make you think he's a very different character than he actually is. And then when you learn what type of character he is, you learn that he's actually just kind of a bonehead. He's just kind of an idiot. He's not, like, malevolent. He's not, like, the type of guy that is trying to, like, he is in a way trying to get ahead. He is in a way like, oh, I want to be something greater than I am. But all in all, really, he's just kind of an idiot. Early on, I think they try, like, it takes forever for the question of the beginning where his friend makes it into the Brotherhood as a squire, and then somebody puts razor blades in his friend's boot, right? And it's unclear in the episode. I was like trying to think like who would have done that. Like, there's nobody else for us to really suspect. There are some bully characters that maybe did it, but nothing really points at that being the case. So really, we're left to just think whether or not Marcus himself did that or would have done that. And in my mind, I felt like the show was just kind of trying to imply that was true, and he's just obviously not going to admit to it. But, like, at the same time, I was quite convinced by his, like, him being adamant that he didn't do it, him going to visit his friend after. I'm like, I don't know. It seems very clearly like he didn't do this, but then it's like, who would have done it? So, I don't know. I got mixed signals from that episode of, like, what I'm supposed to think of this character. Am I supposed to think he's, like, kind of shitty, selfish, guy who will walk all over people to get ahead? Or am I supposed to think that he's, well-meaning, but, kind of just unlucky, maybe? Or I guess clumsy maybe is a better term. Just like stuff kind of happens to him and he just kind of rolls along with it, but he's definitely not like exceptional at what he does. And I think over the course of the show, you do sort of realize what kind of character he is. He's, like I said, he's kind of bonehead. He's kind of an idiot. There is a scene that's played for a joke where like he goes and he saves, like one guy is beating up on another guy, and he goes and like picks that guy up by his like scalp, and he saves him. And then it turns out the guy's like, well, that guy was, well, let's say he was assaulting his chicken. He walks away still, like, smiling like he did a good thing. And it's like, that's kind of a weird reaction, right? You know, it's like, is he stupid? Like, you can tell he clearly cares somewhat about justice. So in that scene, I don't know if it, like, plays super well. Like, as a joke scene, it plays well. But it also kind of confuses, like, does he not understand that, like, he kind of just made a mistake there? That he kind of just, like, saved a guy that probably didn't deserve saving, and he's still, like, smiling to himself about it? He's kind of weird. I don't know, but I think it's just because he's kind of an idiot. He's just kind of a dipshit, you know? He doesn't really, like, he wants to do well, but he's also just kind of too dumb to do well. You have the third major character is the Ghoul. And the Ghoul, I like as a character, but I did want to talk about how I feel like his characters, the way the character like moves through this show, I feel like is pretty kind of random. He just kind of gets pushed in a direction, and it just kind of happens. Like, he gets there and he's like, that's interesting that this circumstance I find myself in is actually somewhat important to my character moving forward. Like, it's just a random path that he takes to get somewhere, and it actually just kind of works out for him. Like, it's not like he's driven to any specific notion. So we'll cover that. Actually, I'll just cover that now. So the first thing, obviously, there is a lot of flashbacks that we get about this character over the course of the show. So we learn a lot more about his backstory. But part of my maybe problem with the Ghoul is that like a lot of this backstory feels very disconnected from the modern plot line that we're dealing with. They're like, does any of it matter? Not really until like the final scene. Then it matters all of a sudden. He wakes up, there's this gang that's like after this one specific guy who ends up kind of being the whole thing that this show kind of rallies about. It's played by Michael Emerson, who I like this guy a lot. And my first introduction to this guy was Lost. He played this like nerdy villain in Lost, but like, you know, he's a nerdy scientist, and he comes across as like kind of sweet and kind. But then when he like gets scary, like he's able to get really scary. They don't use his scariness in this, so he's just kind of like, you know, a silly character, I guess, that just kind of gets, you know, he gets killed early on, let's say it. Spoilers. There are some things I want to say I might be missing for sure, because I think, like, who put the bounty out on this guy? Is it just, what's her face? Moldaver. Right, so Moldaver is, like, she's the queen of, like, a bunch of, raiders. yeah, she's, like, the queen of the raiders, and in the first episode, she's the one that attacks the vault. She steals, the, overseer Hank McLean, is that how he goes? Yeah, Kyle MacLachlan. She steals him, which causes Lucy to leave the vault to go find him, right? So the whole plot line is that Michael Emerson, his character, is going to meet with Moldaver because he's got a thing that she wants. And we find out what that is at the very end. I'll try to avoid spoiling that until we get to the very end, I guess. Like, exactly for what reason. So it's interesting that they would have a bounty out on him if he was going to go deliver himself to her in the first place anyways. I don't know if that is something that doesn't make sense, or if there's some other explanation of that makes sense. But anyways, this is our first like big coincidence of the show, is that the Ghoul ends up only really going after this guy because these bounty hunters show up and they're like, oh, we're going after this guy. And he's like, oh, well, I guess the ghoul has this poster and he just goes after the guy, not really like there being much reason to it. Does he need money? Do we know if he needs money? Like, the only thing I can think is, like, maybe he needs money to buy more of that stuff that keeps him alive and not going feral. It's like this liquid. But the only issue I have with that is that later on, he sells Lucy to these organ guys to get a bunch of it. And so I'm thinking to myself, like, okay, so he could have just done that the whole time. Like, is there a reason he would need to go get this specific bounty? Because he would get more money out of it, and so then he could buy more of this stuff? But, like, it doesn't seem like it's that big a deal for him to just keep bringing bodies to the organ dealers, and they seem to have a whole ton of this stuff anyway, so I don't really know. I don't know if that really made sense. I feel like the ghouls kind of whole thing was that, yeah, he went after this guy. He was really adamant about it for some reason. And then Lucy kind of gets involved. She loses the head because it gets eaten by a giant, like, mutated axolotl thing. And then the head only really gets picked up by Maximus. Again, this is kind of by pure coincidence that they kind of, like, walk up on this. I guess were they chasing down the ghoul? Yeah, no, they were. They were chasing down the ghoul. That's right, because they were like, oh, he's a bad guy. They were chasing him down. They follow him. They find the axolotl, kill it, and just by pure... It kind of seems like pure coincidence to me that, like, they just randomly killed the axolotl and it spits out the head, and they're like, oh, we have the head now. It's kind of a crazy series of circumstances, but at that point, I will also say that the ghoul... does not know, like, the ghoul kind of just leaves after she, like, Lucy blows up, like, the organ stuff. Like, he goes and he takes the things, he gets kidnapped by the government, right? And then he's kind of just off on his own thing. Like, he has no reason to, like, seek anybody else out, I don't think, because he has no reason to know that anybody else has this head, right? He can't know that. He doesn't know. So... he kind of just coincidentally just shows up at the end. I think he comes across... I might have been away for this scene, but I do think at, like, one of the ends of one of the episodes, I think he comes across the other apprentice that shows up that they send to... because Maximus takes over Titus's power armor. Right, and then they send him this new apprentice, which happens to be a bully, and then he ends up becoming a ghoul later. I think he gets killed. I can't even remember, honestly, but I think, like, the ghoul has something to do with it, because then he steals the dog. I don't remember. Something happened to that guy. That might be an important reason why he ends up at Moldaver's. I don't know. It's possible I missed that, but when he gets to Moldaver's, he meets the overseer, Hank, and he recognizes him. Now, this is the most wildest coincidence in all of this, right? That, like, he would end up in the same place where, like, this guy, he recognized, like, he's just kind of randomly gets embroiled in events that lead him to this specific guy that he hates and wants to kill. It's like, that's kind of a wild coincidence, you know? You know what I mean? Like, that's just all of these circumstances leading to that. Like, this is not what he was seeking out, right? It's just kind of randomly that's what happened. So, I don't know. I find a lot of it to be wild circumstance and happenstance and kind of weak in terms of, like, motivating him towards a certain direction. It just seems like he kind of just ends up places that kind of work out for the story, I guess. But I feel like it's kind of bad because the show makes a big deal about his, like, backstory and, like, how important all of this is in the larger scheme of things, but, like, none of his motivation is based on any of that backstory throughout, like, the entire show. Like I said, he just kind of does random shit that seems to be based around like making money or something. But oh, it turns out he has a larger role in this larger conspiracy that just happens to exist in this space, and he happens to be involved in its discovery. That's wild. I don't know. That was sort of one of my big complaints, I think, with the show. I think one of my other ones I wanted to talk about, and this is one of my only other, like, I think big complaints. Like you said, I did like this show for the most part. I really like this show. But the only other one that I think is, the thing is that a lot of this show spends time where we see her brother's perspective, Norm, I believe, and his perspective back at the vault. And so he's discovering this like grand conspiracy about the vault and about the parents' background and like all of this information. And so we're learning all of this through his perspective. He's finding all this information out, right? The thing about the vaults, and as a Fallout enjoyer, I'm aware of this, but if you're a viewer, you've never played the Fallout games before, the vaults were not actually, like, I think, they were not actually created to save people. They were created as almost, like, experimental chambers. So every vault has its own, like, weird quirk to it. So we see that in the show. The show perfectly explains this to us. Now, I will say that the show also says that Vault-Tec basically dropped the bombs themselves, and I don't know if that's a notion that's been put forward in the games at all, but like that seems to be what they're implying in the like final few episodes. It's like Vault-Tec dropped the bombs so that they could start this experiment and basically take over, because then they would have no competitors. And I'm like, okay, kind of makes sense, because they assumed people would not be able to survive on the surface. It would basically just wipe everybody out on the surface, and they'd get full reign of the world, or at least the U.S. I don't know if that's in the games. If not, that's like a really big, like, that's a really big retcon sort of to make, a really big like revelation to just dump on us in this TV show that Vault-Tec dropped the bombs and killed everybody. It makes sense. I don't know that I have a problem with it, but I just don't know if the games actually ever implied that. So we see 2 vaults in this, technically 4, but the vault that Lucy comes from is actually connected to 2 other vaults. She's from Vault 33. It's connected to Vault 31 and 32. Interestingly, I might actually be confused about this, because no, you know, maybe I'm not. So Vault 33 and Vault 32 are kind of like disconnected, but there are times when they connect with each other and they transfer people through, right? So the expectation in the first episode is that Lucy is going to get like a husband from Vault 32. They're just going to send them a husband, and then they're going to have a party, and then they're going to go back to their respective vaults, right? So that's just what happens, but generally they live pretty separately. Additionally, over the course of this, we learn about Vault 31. Now, Vault 31 is very mysterious because Norm finds out that pretty much every overseer that has ever existed comes from Vault 31. He also finds out that Vault 32 was basically completely, like, annihilated. Everybody in Vault 32 is dead. And they also, seemingly, they went crazy and killed themselves. I don't know if I'm like 100% on that whole plot line, what was going on with that, but the overseer from 33 basically cleans all of that up in one day, removes all the evidence, and then splits off some residents of Vault 33 into Vault 32. But the big revelation that we learn is essentially that Vault 31, if you go far enough to Vault 31, you just find a big freezer of people. And it turns out that these people are like managers and people from Vault-Tec back in the old era before the bombs dropped that have just been frozen so that they can basically live forever, and they can create like they use the term managers. They create like the best managers of all time. Like, these people are made to lead. And so the only people leading are these people from Vault 31. The people from Vault-Tec, who are also kind of responsible for a lot of the bad shit that's going on. They seem to at least know a lot more than they let on, so they are lying in a capacity to keep control. But also, Hank, we find out about Hank that later on we find out that he somehow was responsible for the bombs being dropped on Shady Sands. So I guess they have the ability and capacity still to create and drop nukes, I guess. I don't really know how he was able to do that, but, like, we do learn he was, like I said, the show shows that he was originally in Vault-Tec when they were making the decision to drop the bombs in the first place. So we assume he was one of the guys that's part of that decision, and so therefore has the ability to do that, I guess. But he also does it because Lucy's mother takes Lucy and Norm. I think she takes both of them. I'm not sure if she just took Lucy, but I think she took both. I think they say that. To Shady Sands, where they meet Moldover. He kills her. He punishes her. So that's the whole conflict at the end. Is she's like mad because she finds out he blew up Shady Sands and also killed their mother. But my only complaint about this is that I think if you combine the information that's being told to her from Moldover with the information that Norm learns in the vaults, then I think I understand more Lucy's, like, blind trust in Moldover over what her father is telling her. But I don't think in that moment where she is, like, listening to both of them that she just instantly believes, like, there has to be just belief in Moldover, right, in what she's saying, like, oh, your father was the one that blew up Shady Sands, and also this is your mother, and he killed her, and he blew up all of this. And it's like, would she just believe that from the information she has? I don't think so. I think she would believe it if she had the information from the vaults that Norm had. I guess that's my point. Is, like, I don't really know that I agree with the ending of her just kind of, like, buying into all of that instantly. Even though it is the truth, we kind of know that that's the truth. It's like, would she just instantly buy that? No, I don't really think so. She spent this whole quest, like, going to search for her dad, believing her dad's, like, a good person, you know? And she's just gonna 180 just because this lady, who she already knows is a villain, already, stormed into her vault and killed everybody. She's gonna believe her at her word just instantly? I don't know. Didn't buy that. That was also one of the other big problems I kind of had with this. It's just the two, and that's about it. Everything else I found quite enjoyable. I quite liked their use of the music. That was always one of my favorite parts of Fallout. If you've never played Fallout, by the way, it's one of the best things in that game is you get, because you're a Vault Dweller, every Vault Dweller has a Pip-Boy. With your Pip-Boy, you get, like, a little radio, and in the radio you can play, like, music and stuff through it. Obviously, the game has, the world of the game is basically what if the world ended from nuclear annihilation in, like, the 50s, right? So all of the music and a lot of the technology is kind of retro-futuristic in a lot of ways. Like, a lot of the Vault-Tec stuff, the robots, all of that stuff, obviously is very futuristic, but it's made in a way that is, like, stylized towards, like, stuff from the 50s. But then, music, comics, all of that stuff is very, 50s. But the music is actually really real music from the 50s. And so you can sit and, like, sit and listen to, like, classic 50s music. And there's something about it. It does offer a vibe. Because you can, like, go into, like, a completely, like, blown out building and just, like, looking around, reading stuff, shooting rad roaches, opening file cabinets to find caps and you're just sitting there listening to you know, some old 50s song. It's great. It's a great vibe. But they play a lot of the music at the end of the episode, so I'm glad they preserved that feeling, because that's important to Fallout. And I will say, a lot of the music that they used is actually music that was in the game, so it was really fun. Yeah, I think the last thing I really want to touch on is the use of Fallout enemies and creatures. I definitely expected or hoped for at least a lot more of the Fallout creatures, you know, the ones I would have expected to see. And we didn't get to see some of those. I do think, like, obviously they're gonna put them in later stuff, and I think it's better that the story was good rather than just like, oh, here's the thing that you recognize, right? Definitely think that, but I think it'll be fun to see more of the Fallout enemies. And I do think there's, like, times at which they chose to use something that was different than what I expected it to be. There's a point where they have, like, an irradiated bear, which I think they did have in New Vegas. They had, like, irradiated bears. I don't remember if they had, like, a specific name. But, yeah, they used that. I thought that was going to be a Deathclaw cave, though, and it wasn't. And so I was a little disappointed. But they do show, like, a Deathclaw skull about at the end. And the mutated axolotl, that was another one that I was like, I was expecting this fully to be like a Mirelurk situation. Obviously, Mirelurks are much smaller, but I was like, man, this would be a perfect time to show a Mirelurk, but nope. Those are very iconic, like, Fallout enemies, so it was really interesting not to see them. We also haven't seen a super mutant, and so I'm excited to see that in Season 2. I hope we have a super mutant or two. Let's have a bunch of super mutants. We did have rad roaches, and they did look way grosser than in the games. They are just giant cockroaches, but when you imagine that in a live-action version, it's much grosser. So, oh yeah, I also wanted to draw attention to the fact that, like I said, this does take place in the world of the video games. It doesn't contradict anything, and in fact references a lot of specific things from the video games. Most notably, this whole game takes place, or the show takes place in the New California Republic, which is referenced in, I believe, Fallout 2 and Fallout New Vegas. But they also reference Shady Sands, and Shady Sands is referenced in Fallout 1, Fallout 2, and I believe also New Vegas as well. It's a legitimate town that existed in those games. So it's pretty cool that, like, they're you know, specifically just moving the plot forward and just adding new things to the world that are now canon. I like that a lot. I mean, if the show is bad, I might not like that as much. If they're like, oh, we blew up a town that wasn't actually in one of the games. I don't think I would care that much. It's not that big a deal to do, but, you know, I think it's fun. I think it's cool to do things like that. So I'm pretty happy with that. I thought the actors in this were pretty good. You had Walton Goggins, obviously, who played the Ghoul. You had Kyle MacLachlan, he's played Hank McLean. He's great. Every time I see him, man, it just puts a smile on my face. I love every role he does, man. He most notably played Agent Cooper in Twin Peaks. He's fantastic in that, and I think that's part of why it puts a smile on my face every time I think it's specifically that role. Just that character by itself. He also played, he was in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. He played, the father of, Quake. He was pretty good in that. He was also kind of a crazy psychopath in that. But a lot of actors I really like. They had the dude from Hannah Montana, who was like, the little kid in Hannah Montana, and he plays, Norm. He's fantastic in this. I like him a lot. Yeah, it's just overall, like, this was a really good show. I'm really looking forward to Season 2, actually, and I'm gonna tell everybody to watch this show, everybody I know. Get my family to watch this show. I don't know if I mentioned it, but it also, like, it is quite violent, but, like, in a very Fallout way. Like, Fallout has a very dark sense of humor where the violence is kind of, like, it's normalized to an extent. The game's violent stuff happens, but you're also in a video game world where you have stim packs. that can instantly heal any wound. You also have like radiation stuff, and like when you're dealing with radiation, you can get a weird mutation, and that just kind of happens. That's just like a normal thing that happens. You also have ghouls, and their skins are falling off all the time, because they're I don't know, because they're irradiated. So there's a lot of evil, bad stuff, and a lot of like crazy over the top violence, but the violence isn't taken as dramatically as like you might expect, I guess. A lot of it is just kind of played up as kind of a joke, almost in a comedic way, that it's kind of funny how horrific this stuff is. And I liked how they were able to, keep that specific sense of humor, because it is very Fallout, and I feel like it would have taken away from the vibe to not have that, to treat violence with too much seriousness. But yeah, I think that's all I gotta say about Fallout. You guys should watch it. It's good. It's a good show.